My world is built on straight lines and 90-degree angles. As a structural engineer, I live by the laws of physics, by the comforting certainty of stress-load calculations and material tolerances. I find a profound sense of peace in the predictable behavior of steel and concrete. There's a blueprint for everything, a plan that, if followed meticulously, results in a structure that stands firm against the wind and the weight of the world. I've tried to build my life the same way. A stable job, a loving wife, Sarah, and our beautiful, bright, 7-year-old, Lily. Every weekend is planned, every vacation has an itinerary, and our home is a fortress of safety latches, smoke detectors, and color-coded emergency kits. Just last week, I spent an entire Saturday recalibrating the tension on the garage door safety sensors. I know it's a bit much. Sarah tells me so. Gently, of course. She found me under the sink, checking the water pressure regulator, and just sighed. She calls it my overactive preparedness gland. But she doesn't understand. She can't. She didn't see what I saw. It's not just a job for me. This obsession with stability, it's a penance. It's the wall I've been building, brick by painful brick, for the last 30 years. The foundation of that wall was poured on my 10th birthday. My little sister, Chloe, was 8. It was a pool party, one of those chaotic, sugar-fueled affairs with dozens of kids screaming and splashing, parents half-watching while they chatted over plastic cups of cheap wine. I was supposed to be watching her. That was my one job. But there was a magic show, and I was mesmerized by the man pulling a string of colorful scarves from his mouth. When I turned back, the chaos had a new focal point. A knot of kids had gathered at the deep end. Their joyful shrieks were replaced by a different, sharper sound. Chloe had been practicing her handstands underwater. She was a little fish, always showing off how long she could hold her breath. But this time, her foot had slipped, and her head hit the concrete edge. Just like that. A freak accident. A 1 in a million chance, but 1,000,000 to 1 is not 0. I remember standing there, frozen, the bright red of a spilled fruit punch drink swirling in the turquoise water, looking so much like I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything but watch as the world I knew fractured into 1,000,000 pieces. So now, I plan. I calculate. I control every variable I can to keep my daughter, my Lily, safe from the jagged edges of chance. And for the most part, it's worked. Our life is a well-built house, sturdy and secure. But a few weeks ago, a flyer appeared on our doorstep, wedged into the handle. It was garish, printed on cheap, glossy paper that felt slick and greasy to the touch. The colors hurt the eyes. Lurid yellows, screaming magentas, and a deep, unsettling crimson that reminded me of old blood. It announced the arrival of the Harlequin's Carnival of Delights, a traveling fair that had set up in the old abandoned fairgrounds on the edge of town. The centerpiece of the flyer was him, the Harlequin. A clown, but not the friendly balloon animal kind. This one was grotesque. His costume was a filthy patchwork of clashing patterns, checkerboards, stripes, and polka dots, stained with what looked like a mixture of cake frosting and dried rust. His face was caked in white paint, cracked around the eyes and mouth like old plaster. And his smile? It was a permanent, stretched-out crimson slash, too wide for his face, painted with a sloppy, manic energy. But the worst part was his eyes. They were 2 mismatched buttons, one large and black, the other small and bone white, sewn crudely onto the mask. Or maybe, I feared, into his very skin. He was the embodiment of everything I hated. Random, jarring, chaotic. He was a structural failure in human form, and the sight of him made a cold, familiar dread trickle down my spine. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, but I couldn't throw away the image. It had already burrowed into my mind.
A year had passed since I'd thrown that flyer away, but the image of the Harlequin never really left. It became a background process in my mind, a low-grade hum of anxiety. I tried to bury it under blueprints and project deadlines, but it would surface at odd moments. I'd see a splash of magenta on a billboard or a child's bright yellow raincoat, and for a split second, my stomach would clench. That carnival had come and gone in a week, a fleeting blight on the edge of town, but its shadow lingered. My obsession with control, already in overdrive, became all-consuming. I installed a new security system with motion-activated cameras, syncing the feed to my phone so I could check on the house from my office. Sarah tolerated it with weary patience, shaking her head when another package from a home security company arrived. "Who are you expecting, David?" she asked one evening as I tested the new magnetic sensors on Lily's window. "A team of ninjas?" I just grunted in response, unable to explain that I was trying to build a wall against something far worse than ninjas. I was trying to build a wall against randomness. I became a master of risk assessment. Playgrounds were scanned for loose bolts and sharp edges. New toys were disassembled and inspected for choking hazards. I even started cutting Lily's grapes in quarters, not just halves. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of low-level panic, but it was the only way I knew how to function. The ghost of Chloe was always there, a silent reminder that the smallest oversight could lead to catastrophic failure. And somehow, the Harlequin had become the face of that failure, a grinning, chaotic specter haunting the edges of my carefully constructed world. For Lily's 8th birthday, I decided to build the ultimate fortress. The party would be at our house, a controlled environment. I would be the architect of her happiness, and safety would be the primary building material. The guest list was meticulously curated, just 5 of her closest, calmest friends from school. The food was organic, the juice boxes sugar-free. The entertainment was a kindly old woman who made balloon animals. I had run a background check on her, of course. For a few hours that afternoon, it actually worked. The house was filled with the sounds of children's laughter, a sound as pure and perfect as any I'd ever heard. I stood in the corner of the living room, watching Lily open her presents, a genuine smile on her face, and felt a rare, profound sense of peace. For a moment, the wall held. I had done it. I had built a perfect, safe day. I had won. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a blown fuse, but a sudden, silent, absolute plunge into darkness. It was as if the very concept of light had been erased from the universe. The happy chatter died in the children's throats, replaced by a few whimpering gasps. Sarah's hand found mine in the blackness, her grip a vice. "David, what was that?" she whispered, her voice tight with alarm. I was already moving, my mind cycling through the emergency protocols I'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Flashlights were in the top drawer of the kitchen island. Circuit breaker was in the garage. Backup generator should kick on in 10 seconds. I fumbled for my phone, my heart starting a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. But the generator never kicked on. Before I could activate my phone's light, a single, narrow beam cut through the center of the room, like a spotlight on a stage. It illuminated the birthday cake on the table. And standing behind it, where there had been nothing a second ago, was the Harlequin.
He was holding a single, unlit match. The sudden appearance was so jarring, so utterly impossible, that my brain refused to process it. My carefully laid plans, my emergency protocols, they all dissolved into nothing. He looked exactly as he had on the flyer a year ago. The filthy, clashing costume, the mismatched button eyes, the crimson gash of a smile. He smelled of stale popcorn and something metallic, like old rust. He slowly, deliberately struck the match against the side of the cake stand. The flare of the flame threw his grotesque features into horrifying relief, casting long, dancing shadows that turned our familiar living room into a cavern of horrors. With a theatrical flourish, he lit the 8 candles on Lily's cake, the tiny flames reflecting in his dead button eyes. "Make a wish, little lady," he rasped, his voice a dry, scraping sound that filled the cavernous silence. The children were frozen, not screaming, just staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I finally found my voice, a strangled, useless sound. "Get out of my house!" The Harlequin's head tilted, a jerky, puppet-like motion. His painted grin didn't falter. "Oh, but the game has just begun." He gestured with a gloved hand, a lazy wave through the air. In that instant, the other parents and children slumped over in their chairs, their bodies going limp as if their strings had been cut. Sarah cried out, a sharp, terrified sound, and then she too went silent, slumping against me. I was the only one left. Me and him and my daughter. Lily, bless her innocent heart, wasn't crying. She was just staring at the clown, mesmerized by the flickering candles. The Harlequin leaned in close to her, his foul breath extinguishing the candles one by one. "Your daddy," he whispered, his voice a venomous secret meant only for her. "Likes to think he's in control. But control is just a pretty lie we tell ourselves before the fall." And then, in a blink, the room was plunged back into darkness. When the lights flickered back on a moment later, he was gone. And so was Lily. The cake was still on the table, the wicks of the candles still smoking. Where Lily had been sitting, there was only a single, grimy playing card. The Joker. I picked it up. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold it. On the back, scrawled in what looked like red crayon, was a riddle. Where first vows were spoken and gestures lay broken, your prize is now waiting, your little heart token. There was no thought of calling the police. How could I? A monster from a nightmare walked through my walls, put everyone to sleep, and vanished with my daughter? They would think I was insane. The riddle was the proof. It wasn't for them. It was for me. The first vows, the old abandoned church in the industrial park where Sarah and I had our first date. The jesters lay broken, the long-defunct Jesters Jubilee Carnival that used to operate on its grounds. He was showing me that he knew me, that he had been watching, learning the blueprints of my life only to tear them down. My obsession with control had been turned into a weapon against me. He was using my own precision as the path to his chaos. I grabbed my car keys, my movements stiff and robotic. Sarah and the others were beginning to stir, groaning as if waking from a deep, drugged sleep. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, confused, then widened with the dawning, horrific realization that Lily's chair was empty. "David? Where's Lily?" I couldn't look at her. I couldn't bear to see the terror in her eyes, a reflection of my own. "I'm going to get her back," I said, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. I didn't know if it was a promise or a prayer. As I walked out the door, leaving behind the shambles of my carefully constructed life, I knew this was the point of no return. I was willingly walking into his world, a world with no blueprints, no safety codes, only the rigged rules of his sick game. The fear was a living thing inside me, but underneath it was something else, a cold, hard resolve. He wanted to show me that control was an illusion. I would show him that it was the only thing that mattered.
My world narrowed to the 3 red cups on the rickety table. The suffocating smell of mildew and stale sugar faded. The rhythmic creak of some decaying carnival ride in the shadows faded. The only things that existed were those 3 cups, a small grimy ball of paper he placed under the center one, and the glint in his mismatched eyes. This was my element, a physics problem, a system with a single variable, a question with a right and wrong answer. I was a structural engineer. My entire life was dedicated to observation, to seeing the minute details others missed, to predicting outcomes based on knowable data. He thought this was his world, his game. But he had made a fatal error. He had presented me with a problem I could solve. I could do this. I had to do this. "Watch closely," a Harlequin hissed, his gloved hands hovering over the cups like spiders. His movements began slowly, a simple shuffle, right to left, left to center. I locked my eyes on the target cup. My mind became a machine, calculating vectors, tracking momentum, ignoring the theatrical flourishes of his hands and distracting sway of his body. He was trying to overload my senses, to pull my focus with a flick of his wrist or a dip of his shoulder, but I saw through it. The chaos was a facade. Underneath it was just physics. I noticed the smallest imperfection,
a tiny chip on the lip of the target cup, and more than that, I could see the slight difference in its movement. The cup with the ball had a slightly different center of gravity. It had a fraction of a millimeter of drag against the sticky tabletop that the other two didn't. It was an imperfection, a flaw in his system, and I had found it. He sped up. His hands became a blur, the plastic cups a red cyclone on the table. But I never lost it. That tiny imperfection, that minuscule difference in friction, it was the anchor of my logic in his sea of chaos. I held on to it, tracking it through the storm of motion. The shuffling stopped. The three cups sat in a line, mocking me. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I could feel Lily's vacant stare on me, a silent, unbearable pressure. This was for her. I would not fail. "Choose," the Harlequin rasped, leaning forward, his foul breath washing over me. His painted smile was a wound in the dim light. I took a deep, steadying breath, the air thick and cloying. I pointed a trembling finger at the cup on the far right. That one. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. The Harlequin's smile widened into a grotesque parody of joy. His button eye sparkled. "An excellent choice," he cackled, the sound dry and rattling like stones in a tin can. "A confident choice, the choice of a man who believes he is in control." He reached out slowly, his grimy glove wrapping around the base of the cup I had chosen. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment I won, the moment I took my daughter back. He lifted the cup. It was empty. For a single, silent, crystalline moment, my brain simply refused to accept the data. It was impossible. I had tracked it. I had calculated it. I had been certain. The world tilted, the laws of physics dissolving around me. The Harlequin's laughter erupted, a harsh, grating sound. It scraped against my raw nerves. "You foolish, foolish man. Did you really think it would be that simple?" He didn't give me time to process, no time to scream or rage. His hand, the one not holding the empty cup, darted out and seized a large rusted wrench that had been lying on the table among other junk. And one fluid, horrifying motion, he swung it. I didn't even have time to shout or name. It was a sickening, wet crack that echoed through the basement, a sound that would replay in my nightmares for eternity. Lily's small body slumped sideways in the chair, her head lolling at an unnatural angle, and a dark crimson stain began to blossom on her pretty party dress. And then silence. And the creaking stopped. The chimes stopped. The world stopped. My daughter was gone. The Harlequin watched me, his head tilted, the terrible smile plastered on his face. My entire being was a hollow cavern of silent, shrieking agony. With a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and lifted the other two cups. They were empty too. "The game," he whispered, his voice dripping with triumphant venom, "was not about finding the ball. It was about you believing you ever had a chance. Hope, my friend, is the most fragile foundation of all. My control didn't just break, it detonated. The meticulous, ordered world I had built for myself atomized into pure, white-hot rage. I saw a discarded rebar rod on the floor, its end rusted to a sharp point. I didn't think, I just moved. With a roar that was not human, a sound torn from the deepest, most animal part of my soul, I tackled him, driving him back off the dais. He hit the floor hard. I raised the route, and I brought it down, again and again and again. I wasn't just stabbing him, I was destroying him. I was destroying the chaos, the uncertainty, the randomness that had stolen everything from me. His gaudy, filthy costume tore, and the warm, slick wetness of his blood covered my hands, mingling with the grime and the dust and the despair of this horrible, horrible place.
I awoke to the smell of antiseptic and the muted rhythmic beeping of a machine. The world was a fuzzy, sterile white, a hospital room. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from my hands, and when I looked down, I saw they were bandaged. Thick white gauze wrapped around my knuckles and palms. For a blissful, fleeting moment, I didn't remember. And then, like a tidal wave of filth and sorrow, it all came rushing back. The basement, the cups, the wrench, Lily. Sound. A raw, ragged sob escaped my throat, tearing at my insides. A police officer was sitting in a chair by the door. He looked tired, his expression a mixture of pity and professional detachment. He told me the story, filling in the blanks my trauma had mercifully erased. They had found me, covered in blood, cradling my daughter's body, surrounded by the wreckage of the makeshift carnival. Sarah had called them, hysterical after I'd left. They'd traced my phone. The man I had killed, the Harlequin, was a transient named Arthur Penn, a former carnival worker with a long history of mental illness. He had been squatting in the abandoned church for months. He was dead. I had saved the world from a monster. They called it self-defense. A father pushed beyond the limits of sanity. There wouldn't be any charges. I was the victim here. But then the officer told me the last part, his voice gentle, trying to soften a blow that could never be softened. In their investigation, they had found no trace of the paper ball from the cup game. They had searched the entire basement, the table, the clown's pockets. Nothing. The game was rigged from the very beginning. The cups were always empty. He never had any intention of letting me win. That's when the final, most terrible truth settled into the hollow space where my heart used to be. I had won, in a way. I had killed the chaos, but my rage, my desperate final lunge for control, had blinded me. I was so focused on destroying him, on my vengeance, that I didn't stop to think. I didn't look. I didn't use the logical, observant mind I was so proud of. The game was a lie, and in my fury, I had accepted its premise completely. I had played by his rules to the bloody, bitter end. I am no longer a structural engineer. The man who lived by blueprints and calculations is gone, buried in that filthy basement with his daughter. All that's left is this hollow shell, a monument to a single catastrophic failure. I spent my life building walls to protect my family from a freak 1 in a million accident. I was so terrified of the chaos I couldn't control, the hand of fate I couldn't predict. But in the end, the thing that destroyed my world wasn't random chance. It was a choice. My choice. I chose to play his game. Now I am the living embodiment of my own worst fear. A man who stood by, helpless, and watched his world fall apart.
A man left with nothing but the chilling, quiet realization that some games are designed to make you fail, and the only way to win is not to play at all.
The horrors linger. Thank you so much for watching or listening. By liking and subscribing, you're helping me summon the next chilling tale from the shadows. Join our community of the brave and prepare for what's to come.